A missing persons case usually begins with uncertainty, a witness who can't remember, a timeline that doesn't add up, a clue discovered weeks too late. But the disappearance of 19-year-old Brandon Swanson began differently, because for 47 minutes, someone was listening. On the night of May 14, 2008, Brandon was driving home across the quiet farmland of southwestern Minnesota. He wasn't running from anyone. He wasn't afraid. And when he called his parents shortly before 2 in the morning, his problem seemed almost laughably ordinary. His car was stuck in a ditch. He needed a ride. Nothing more. For the next 47 minutes, Brandon stayed on the phone with his parents as he walked through the darkness. They heard him cross fields. They heard him climb fences. They heard him describe lights in the distance that he believed would lead him home. Then something happened. Oh shit. The line went dead. Despite one of the largest searches ever conducted in the region, Brandon Swanson was never seen again. More than 17 years later, investigators still cannot answer a question that seems deceptively simple. What happened in the final seconds of that call? This is the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Here is the thing about Brandon Swanson that investigators keep returning to. There was nothing unusual about him. Nothing to suggest the night would end any differently than any other. He was 19 years old. He lived with his parents in Marshall, a small city in southwestern Minnesota's farm country. Enrolled at Minnesota West Community and Technical College, studying wind energy technology, making plans. The type of young man who, when his car got stuck at 2 in the morning, called his parents instead of panicking alone on a dark road. That evening, he'd been at a gathering with friends celebrating the end of the semester. Normal conversation, normal goodbyes. Sometime after midnight, he started the drive home on roads he knew well, through countryside he'd traveled countless times. He never arrived. At approximately 1 a.m., Brandon left the gathering and headed toward Marshall. The roads were quiet. The landscape around him, farmland, gravel roads, drainage ditches, scattered rural communities, was ordinary for anyone who had grown up here. For the investigators who would later try to trace his path, it would prove unforgiving. Somewhere on that drive, something went wrong. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just a small mistake, the kind that happens to drivers every winter across rural America. A car in a ditch. That was all it seemed to be. At approximately 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his parents. His voice was calm. His car had slid into a ditch and couldn't get traction. Could they come pick him up? He told them where he thought he was, near the small town of Lind, maybe 20 minutes from home. His parents had no reason to doubt him. They got in the car and drove toward Lind. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was that the most important assumption of the entire case had already been made. And it was wrong. Brandon described what he could see. His parents flashed their headlights and watched the road. Brandon couldn't see them. His parents couldn't see him. Every attempt to establish contact failed, and the confusion deepened with each one. Still, Brandon wasn't worried. He could see lights ahead, town lights, he believed, and he felt confident about the direction. Rather than wait at his vehicle, Brandon made a decision. He told his parents he was going to walk toward those lights while staying on the phone. What he couldn't know, not in darkness, not on a road he'd misidentified, was that every step forward may have been a step in the wrong direction. Not toward the town he thought he saw, toward something else entirely. And the next 47 minutes would be the last confirmed record of where Brandon Swanson went. What makes Brandon's case extraordinary isn't just that he disappeared. It's that someone heard it happen. Most missing person investigations begin after the fact. Witnesses struggle to reconstruct what they saw. Timelines are pieced together from surveillance footage, receipts, phone records. The disappearance itself is often a blank, a moment that happened when nobody was watching. In Brandon's case, his parents had a front row seat, not to what they could see, to what they could hear. And for 47 minutes, what they heard was mostly mundane. Brandon sounded calm throughout. No urgency in his voice, no fear. The conversation kept circling back to the same frustrating puzzle. He could see lights ahead, and his parents couldn't find him. The questions were reasonable. The answers kept not working. Both sides were trying as hard as they could. Brandon was describing what he saw. His parents were driving, flashing headlights, checking road after road. By every logic of the situation, They should have been closing in on each other. Instead, the gap never closed. Beneath the surface of what felt like a navigation problem, something stranger was building, something neither side could see yet. Because both of them were entirely right about what they were observing. They simply weren't looking at the same place. To understand why Brandon's situation deteriorated, you have to understand what rural Minnesota looks like after midnight. In daylight, the landscape is readable. Fields stretch to the horizon. Roads connect in patterns locals know by instinct. Waterways cut through the countryside in predictable channels. Distances make sense. After dark, all of that disappears. Lights appear closer than they are. Depth vanishes. What looks like a 20-minute walk can be 3 miles of broken terrain, fence crossings, and drainage ditches that aren't visible until you're standing in one. And for someone who believes they know exactly where they are, who has that confidence actively working against them, the danger isn't panic. It's the quiet certainty that they're almost there. Brandon kept moving toward the lights. He crossed fences. He moved through fields. And at some point during the call, he mentioned something that would become one of the most significant details in the entire investigation. He could hear running water. At the time, it registered as just another obstacle. But running water can be traced. Waterways can be mapped. The sound of a creek or a river can anchor a person to a landscape more precisely than almost anything else a caller might describe. Investigators would eventually understand what it meant. At the time, no one did. For now, Brandon simply kept walking. His parents kept searching. The call kept going. Nearly an hour had passed since he first reached out for help, and the distance between them hadn't closed at all. Two parties working toward the same goal, both trying, both certain they were close. Moving through completely separate corners of southwestern Minnesota, neither one aware of it yet. The final moments of Brandon Swanson's documented timeline unfold in under 10 seconds. After 47 minutes of walking and talking and searching, the call ended without warning. No argument, no escalation, no indication that anything had changed. Brandon was mid-conversation with his father when something interrupted him. 2 words. "Oh shit." Then silence. The line went dead. What those words mean has been debated for 17 years, and the honest answer is that no one knows. What's clear is that the reaction was instinctive, not a warning, not a call for help, but the involuntary sound a person makes when something happens suddenly in front of them, when there isn't time to think first. Brandon Swanson called his son back immediately. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. The phone rang somewhere in the dark, unanswered. For the first time that night, confusion gave way to real fear. The question was no longer where Brandon was. The question was what had just happened to him. By the time investigators began assembling an answer at first light, they would discover that the most important fact about the whole case wasn't what Brandon said in his final seconds. It was where he had been standing all along. And that discovery would transform everything investigators thought they knew about the night of May 14, 2008. When dawn broke over southwestern Minnesota, investigators faced an unusual problem. They weren't ready to search for Brandon Swanson yet. Before they could find him, they first had to answer a simpler question. Where had he actually been? Throughout the night, everyone had operated under the same assumption. Brandon was near land. His parents believed it. Brandon believed it. He had sounded confident enough that nobody questioned it. And because of that assumption, the earliest search effort had been aimed at entirely the wrong place. As daylight spread across the countryside, investigators retraced the route Brandon was believed to have taken. Roads were driven. Ditches were walked. Every piece of terrain surrounding Lind was examined with the expectation of finding something. The answer each time was the same. No vehicle, no evidence, no sign that Brandon had been anywhere near the area at any point during the night. That failure forced a hard question investigators hadn't expected to ask. Brandon had sounded confident. He had traveled these roads before. There was no obvious reason to doubt him. And yet the evidence was clear. He wasn't there, which meant everything the search had assumed from the beginning was wrong. The answer arrived through technology. By analyzing the cell phone tower activity connected to Brandon's calls, investigators were able to place him approximately 25 miles from where he believed he was, near the communities of Taunton and Porter, not Lind. He hadn't been close to the area his parents had searched all night. He had been in an entirely different part of the county. The revelation instantly explained what had seemed inexplicable the night before. The headlights no one could see. The town that never appeared no matter how far Brandon's parents drove. The 47-minute phone call between a son and his parents who were unknowingly searching in completely different parts of southwestern Minnesota. Both sides had been trying. Both sides had been right about what they were observing. They had simply never been anywhere near each other. Search teams immediately shifted west. Within hours, they found Brandon's car, a Chevrolet Lumina, resting in a ditch along a gravel road near Taunton. Exactly where he had described it. Not badly damaged, just stuck. For a brief moment, finding it felt like a breakthrough. But the longer investigators examined the scene, the more troubling it became. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of a struggle, nothing to explain where Brandon had gone. The car confirmed his account of the night perfectly, and it revealed something investigators hadn't fully confronted until now. Brandon had willingly walked away from the safest place available to him, into darkness, into terrain he clearly misunderstood, which raised a question that would shadow the entire investigation. If he had been that wrong about where he was, what else might he have been wrong about? With the car located, the next challenge was the landscape itself. Miles of farmland stretched in every direction. Gravel roads cut through isolated sections of countryside. Drainage ditches and waterways crossed the area in unpredictable patterns. From the air, the region appeared open and searchable. On the ground, it was anything but. Investigators needed something more precise than a visual search. They needed a path. And so trained bloodhounds were brought to the scene, given Brandon's scent at the vehicle, and put to work on what seemed like a straightforward task. Start at the car. Follow wherever Brandon had gone. What happened next would become one of the most significant developments in the entire case. The dogs moved away from the vehicle, across agricultural land, through open fields, along portions of the landscape that seemed to align with the route Brandon had described during his 47-minute phone call. Investigators began noticing something remarkable. The trail matched what he had told his parents out loud. He had said he was crossing fences. The route moved through agricultural property. He had described walking through fields. The dogs continued through open farmland. With every step, the mystery became more unsettling. What Brandon had described as a short walk toward nearby lights was turning into a significant journey through isolated terrain. The trail suggested he had traveled much farther from his vehicle than anyone had originally imagined. Then investigators encountered something that immediately focused their attention: the Yellow Medicine River. And suddenly, a detail from Brandon's final phone call took on enormous significance. Earlier in the conversation, he had mentioned hearing running water. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Now it appeared potentially critical. For a moment, the pieces appeared to fit. The river explained the darkness, the sudden interruption, the mention of running water. Resources were concentrated around the area. Search teams examined the riverbanks and surrounding terrain. Then the case took another unexpected turn. The bloodhound scent reportedly continued beyond the river. The trail didn't stop at the water. It kept going. The river had looked like an answer. Now it looked like another question. Searchers followed the trail farther west, farther from the vehicle, farther from every assumption that had guided the investigation. Eventually, the scent reached a gravel road, and there it ended. Not in a field, not beside the river, near a road. That detail has never been fully explained. Environmental conditions can affect scent trails. Weather, terrain, and time can all break a trail without explanation. But a road is also where journeys change direction, where vehicles travel, where one person can intersect with another. Investigators have never been able to confirm what happened there, but they have never been able to fully explain it either. Every answer the trail provided seemed to create a new mystery. Most missing person investigations lose momentum. Days become weeks. Resources get redirected. Public attention moves elsewhere. Brandon's case resisted that pattern, not because investigators were making progress, but because the absence of progress had itself become a kind of evidence. If there was something to find, they should have found it by now. The fact that they hadn't demanded an explanation. Search operations continued long after the initial days. Teams returned when crops were harvested and the fields opened up. They came back when snow melted in spring and covered ground became visible again. When vegetation died back in autumn, investigators looked again at areas previously obscured. The logic was straightforward: the landscape changes. What's hidden in one season can surface in another. And so they kept coming back. There was a reasonable expectation driving every search. People who vanish in accidents leave traces. A shoe, a phone, a piece of clothing. Evidence surfaces after seasons change, after water levels drop, after the land eventually gives something up. That expectation wasn't naive. It was based on how these cases typically unfold. The repeated failure to meet, it was the part that made no sense. By 2011, investigators and volunteers had searched approximately 122 square miles. To understand what that means, 122 square miles is larger than many American cities. Farmland, waterways, roads, drainage systems, and remote rural terrain, examined repeatedly, carefully, over multiple years. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension assisted the case and kept it active. Tips were received. Leads were evaluated. Each offered a brief moment of possibility. Each led nowhere. And still, nothing emerged. No phone, no clothing, no confirmed belongings, no remains. Nothing to anchor any explanation to a specific place or a specific moment. After years of effort, the most significant thing investigators had was the thing they didn't have: evidence. For some, the failed searches strengthened the accident theory. Perhaps the terrain had concealed evidence better than expected. Perhaps the landscape still held answers waiting to be discovered. Others believed the lack of evidence suggested Brandon had traveled far beyond the areas investigators focused on. And for those who considered foul play, every unsuccessful search raised a harder possibility. What if there was nothing to find in that landscape because Brandon had not remained there at all? The evidence supported none of those conclusions with certainty. And certainty was exactly what the case needed. By the early 2010s, what had begun as an urgent search had become something harder to define. It was no longer simply an active investigation. It had become a long-term mystery, a case in which every major clue had been examined, every obvious lead had been pursued, and the central question had remained unanswered through all of it. Not gone cold, something different, permanently unresolved. And to understand why, investigators would have to confront the possibilities directly. By this point, investigators had searched more than 120 square miles. They had traced a bloodhound route through rural countryside. They had examined rivers, fields, roads, and farmland under every seasonal condition available to them. They had received tips, chased leads, and revisited the same evidence for years. Brandon Swanson was still missing, which forces the question every unsolved disappearance eventually arrives at, the one no search, no lead, and no evidence has been able to answer since May 2008. What actually happened after the call ended? 3 explanations have emerged over the years. Each is supported by evidence. Each contains serious problems. The first, and the one most investigators reach for first, is an accident. Brandon was walking alone after midnight, through terrain he couldn't clearly see, in an area he'd already demonstrated he didn't accurately understand. The landscape around him was full of hazards invisible in the dark: drainage channels, creek banks, steep embankments, uneven ground, and the Yellow Medicine River itself. Under those conditions, accidents happen. Every year, experienced outdoors people are injured in environments far less demanding than the one Brandon was crossing. Then there are the final 2 words. Oh shit. They are brief. They are immediate. And they carry a specific character that investigators have spent years analyzing. They are not the words of someone carefully describing a developing threat. Not the words of someone reacting to another person. Not the language of someone who had time to think. They carry the character of someone confronted by something sudden. Something that arrived before there was any warning. The involuntary reaction of a person who didn't see it coming. For many investigators, those 2 words fit an accident more naturally than anything else in the case. Then come the searches, and this is where the accident theory encounters its greatest challenge. Over years of effort, teams covered more than 122 square miles under conditions specifically designed to recover what earlier searches had missed. Fields in different seasons, riverbanks at different water levels, vegetation cleared, snow melted, crops harvested, each return to the landscape driven by the same expectation. Accidents leave traces. Evidence surfaces eventually. The land gives something up. That expectation was reasonable. The repeated failure to meet, it was the part that made no sense. The accident theory fits the final seconds of the phone call better than any other explanation available. It is everything that followed. The complete silence of 122 square miles of systematic searching that it cannot account for. The second theory begins with a fact investigators know for certain. Brandon was lost. Not completely, not helplessly, but enough to fundamentally misunderstand where he was. He believed he was near Lind. He was 25 miles away. And if he was that wrong about his location, he may have been equally wrong about the lights he was walking toward, the landmarks he thought he recognized, and the destination he believed was minutes away. Supporters of this theory argue that the most important clue in the case isn't the final exclamation. It's the 47 minutes of confusion that came before it. Brandon wasn't disoriented for 2 seconds at the end of the call. He was disoriented for the entire call, navigating by landmarks he couldn't accurately see, moving toward a town that wasn't where he believed, crossing terrain he didn't recognize as unfamiliar. The danger had been building from the moment he left the vehicle. In this version of events, the "oh, shit" wasn't a fatal fall. It was a stumble, a dropped phone, a momentary break in the call that didn't end the journey. Brandon kept moving, possibly injured, increasingly exhausted, traveling farther and farther beyond the areas investigators initially concentrated on. The danger wasn't a single catastrophic accident. It was prolonged disorientation across miles of dark and unfamiliar terrain, moving in a direction that felt right but wasn't. This theory accounts for the search failures better than any other explanation. If Brandon traveled well beyond the expected area, the repeated failures make more sense. But eventually, it reaches the same wall as the accident theory. It explains how Brandon may have become lost. What it cannot fully explain is how every trace of him vanished as well. The third theory is the one investigators speak about most carefully. The reason is straightforward. There is no confirmed evidence supporting it. No suspect has ever been identified. No witness has reported seeing a confrontation. No forensic evidence places another person at the scene. On paper, foul play appears speculative. The reason it cannot simply be dismissed isn't because of what the evidence shows. It's because of where the bloodhound trail ended. The scent reportedly stopped not in a field, not at a riverbank, but near a gravel road. Roads are where vehicles travel, where journeys change direction, where two people can cross paths without leaving any record of the meeting. Could Brandon have encountered someone after the call ended? Could a seemingly ordinary interaction have altered everything that followed? The evidence doesn't answer those questions, and it doesn't eliminate them either. Environmental conditions can break a scent trail without any human involvement whatsoever. The road endpoint may mean nothing, or it may mean everything. There is genuinely no way to determine which. Foul play cannot be proven. In this case, it also cannot be ruled out. In a case built almost entirely on absence, that distinction matters more than it normally would. What makes Brandon's case so genuinely difficult isn't that investigators missed something obvious. It's that every theory survives part of the evidence and fails against the rest. The accident theory fits the final seconds of the call. It doesn't fit the searches. The disorientation theory fits the 47 minutes of confusion. It doesn't fit the disappearance of every trace. The foul play theory fits the mystery. It lacks the evidence to become a conclusion. Each theory answers one question and leaves another standing behind it. After 17 years, the case sits exactly where it began, not for lack of effort, not for lack of searching, but because the evidence itself refuses to point in only one direction, which leaves investigators with the same image they have been returning to since May 2008. A young man walking through darkness toward lights he believed would lead him home. A phone call lasting 47 minutes. 2 words, and a silence that no investigation, no search, and no theory has ever been able to break. Most cold cases leave behind unanswered questions. That is their defining characteristic, what they couldn't resolve. Brandon's case left behind something different. It left behind change. While investigators continued searching for answers, Brandon's family turned their attention to a different problem. In the hours after he vanished, they encountered a system that didn't always respond to adult disappearances with the same urgency as cases involving children. Brandon was 19, legally an adult, but his circumstances were not routine. He had disappeared mid-conversation. His location was unknown. There were clear reasons to treat it as an emergency. The gap between what the situation demanded and what the system provided cost time no one could recover. Their advocacy contributed to legislation that became known as Brandon's Law, reforms designed to improve coordination and emergency response when adults disappear under potentially dangerous circumstances. Procedures were changed. Protocols were updated. Future families in similar situations would encounter a more responsive system than the one Brandon's family faced in the hours after May 14, 2008. It was meaningful change. It came at an unimaginable cost. The law couldn't reveal what happened during those 47 minutes. It couldn't explain those final 2 words. It couldn't bring Brandon home. But it ensured that something lasting came from a story that still has no ending. That the gap his family ran into would be narrower for the next family that needed to make that same desperate call. Sometimes a case changes the world even when it remains unsolved. Brandon's did. More than 17 years later, the fields are still there. The gravel roads, the fences, the Yellow Medicine River winding through the Minnesota countryside, unchanged from the night of May 14, 2008. The landscape that Brandon Swanson walked through on that night looks the same today as it did then. It has offered no answers. It has surrendered nothing. It simply remains. The vehicle was found. The bloodhound trail was followed. 122 square miles were searched under every seasonal condition investigators could access. A law was passed in his name, and Brandon Swanson never came home. A 19-year-old called his parents for help. He believed he was almost home. He stayed on the phone with them for 47 minutes as he walked through darkness toward lights he was certain would lead him somewhere safe. They heard him cross fields. They heard him climb fences. They heard him describe a destination that may never have existed. Then 2 words. Then silence. That is everything that is confirmed. Everything that is known. Everything the 47 minutes left behind. And after all this time, after every search, every lead, every theory, every season, every return to those fields, everything that isn't known still waits somewhere in the dark.